Hello and welcome to the Book Pharm podcast, a book club podcast started by two very bored pharmacy technicians looking for a hobby. Thanks for tuning in and let's get started.
Sea of Tranquility by, I don't remember. Emily St.
And
John Mandel. There we go. So we left off on part two. And we're now on part three.
we're going to be discussing part 3,
Two.
5.
The setting is 2203 in the future. And we're learning it's in Olive Llewellyn's perspective, yes.
So right now, nothing really huge has happened in the book yet because they're still lining out all of the stories for all the different characters. So right now we're on the third character, which would be, I think it's the last one. Yeah, it's the last character.
Well,
Um, I guess the last one that intertwines
yeah,
with the other two. Yeah.
yeah,
She is an author. She has wrote a book about the pandemic based off of 2020's pandemic, which I'm sure that we all remember.
yeah.
And
It's
she's going
called,
on
the book is called Marion Bad. I just thought I'd mention
Marian
that.
Dad. Yeah, which I'm not really sure what that
Yeah,
means, but
yeah.
hey, there's a
I
reason
think,
I'm not an author.
I think she mentioned it has something to do with Shakespeare, but I don't remember.
No, so anyway, so she's going on
She's
book tour.
on Earth because she lives on the moon.
She lives on Moon Colony 2, which is the second colony built on the moon because I think it's the Earth has been consumed of it has been overconsumed of water and certain areas are just too hot at this point to be inhabited. So
Yeah.
global warming is happening, obviously, because that is a real thing. And then, what is it? Water levels are rising. That's what it was. So some land is already taken up by water.
Yes. Um. Yes.
So you
She
can assume
does.
that that's Italy.
Right. Italy's gone, or at least
Italy's
Venice.
out. Yeah, Venice is gone. Venice is no more.
Yeah. Um. She. I. So she does mention that sometimes the thing she likes about Earth, because while she's on Earth, she does mention that she does like the blue sky and how real it is, because on the moon they don't have like blue sky or anything. It's like a simulation dome.
It's like a dome, yeah.
Yeah, it's like a dome, and it creates its own like projection kind of thing that mimics the sky, and there's like trees, but they're not like real. But she does say that that's the only thing she really likes about Earth. I know she says that Earth kind of unsettles her, but she has lived on the moon her whole life.
Yeah, and her parents retired on Earth.
Yes. Um, we learn that Olive, she's married to a construction worker slash architect person. Um, and he does mention a mildly suspicious underground tunnel from the university that he's working on.
To the government facility behind it.
Yeah. He's like, oh yeah, I'm working on this tunnel. Seems kind of suspicious. And she's like, And Olive is assuming that the tunnel is related to a time travel project, which is a little bit of some foreshadowing here. For sure.
Yeah, so she ends up going to visit her parents while she is here on
Yes.
Earth. And her dad says, what was it that he said? It's um because she's missing her husband and her daughter, uh,
Sylvie.
Sylvie. He says something along the lines of like every minute is like 10 times more hard being away from somebody. Like when I don't even know what it was, but he says something along the lines of like it's so hard to be away from somebody for so long. Like and it takes a toll on you. And she wonders to herself like, well, if that's the case, then why are you guys all the way here on Earth? You know, you guys never come visit me, all this stuff like that. And then she ends up leaving, but I just wanted to point that out because it seems like she's very lonely. Like, even
Yeah.
whenever she does talk to her husband, it's not like, you know, oh, I miss you and blah, blah, blah. It's like very formal. He obviously cannot handle the stress of having their daughter alone because their daughter's acting up at school
Mm-hmm.
and everything like that. Um, but yeah, so I just want to point that out because later on, like in the next episode that we do, there's going to be like a transition of her character that I kind of liked. But we'll talk about that later.
I wanted to mention that when during her book tour, she lectures about pandemics. It's a reoccurring theme, the pandemic thing. I mean, her book is about it. She talks about how she feels like there's one looming. I remember she said some people were getting sick
In
somewhere.
Australia, yeah.
Yeah, and she's on edge this whole time. And she's like, "Oh, Earth is like this germ germ city." But Olive also faces a lot of sexism from a lot of the people interviewing her. They're very much like, shouldn't you be at home with your kid and things like that? And she's like,
Yeah,
it
how
irritates her.
kind of your husband to stay at home with his daughter and she's like, so you're saying it's kind of him to father the parent that like father the kid that he made?
Yeah.
Like everybody's like how is your husband doing this alone while you're here? And like I think a taxi driver even says that to her at one point and she's like, well, this is how I provide for her.
Yeah, that is what she says. Um, there is a book signing, and I remember she signed a used copy of her book, but it had already been signed before. I remember that creeped her out, and it just kind of stood out to me. I don't know if it's really that important, but it's kind of interesting. Again, Olive is like this really anxious person. Like if something is happening,
Yeah.
it's kind of it that throws her off. She kind of like flips out a little bit. I don't know. Did we mention Gasperi before in our last episode? Gasperi.
Um, yes, because he was with Morella and she freaked out and ran
Yes.
away.
Yes, because he murdered those two guys. And he was arrested. And Olive mentions that in her book, one of the main characters' names is Gasperi. And she meets a man named Gasperi. And he mentions the odd parallel between the book and asks if she's even heard like that violin music that we've been bringing up in the other episode from Mirella's friend's Vincent's brother, that he composed the violin music that he played with that projection video that Vincent recorded. So
Yeah.
it's a stretch, but yeah, and he mentions the odd parallel between his name and her book. He asks if she's heard violin music playing because apparently in her book she wrote about violin music playing in odd places, I guess. Which there's a huge parallel between Olive's book and the book we're reading.
Well, this is the end of part 3. They like literally we just finally see like an instance of something other than just the violin music in 2 or more stories.
Mm-hmm.
which is very relieving because for a minute there it was like, okay, come on, like, is this how the book's gonna be? Because you're reading three different stories, and so you're starting over three different times,
Yeah.
and it's just kind of like, okay, finally something has like concluded two
Clicked.
or more
Yeah.
stories, yeah.
Puzzle pieces coming together. In part four, it's even farther into the future. It's like 200 years more into the future. Um, so 2401. And this is in a boy named Gasperry's perspective, which I assume is the same Gasperry, but it's, again, 200 years later. So I was like, everybody has the name Gasperry then. We thought it was a unique name, right?
No, and so he's a little boy, and I want to just point out before we forget and like gloss over this part because it was very like tiny. Um,
Mm-hmm.
his mother named him after the character from uh, Olive's book, and they live across from Olive's old house on Moon Colony 2.
Mm-hmm.
And a new family moves in that's just kind of like rigid and like almost like they're not even supposed to be there. And he meets this young girl, Talia. And then
Yes.
eventually that family just like moves away. Like they're there for a couple of months and then they move away.
Mm-hmm.
I just wanted to point that out because it does come back later in the book.
Yes. And Colony 2 has become practically a failure, because
Yeah.
they
It's
don't
known as
have
like
the sky
the Night
anymore.
City.
The Night City. It's basically like shady, really shady. Like there's graffiti on walls, and like it's not a really safe place to be.
Well, and it's like they have shutters because since there's no simulated sky, they have 2 weeks with just the sun, and they have 2 weeks with just the moon, and so they have like really bright LED street lamps for whenever they're in their 2 weeks of just the moon, and then they have what's it called? They have like panels on their windows for when so that they can simulate some sort of circadian rhythm whenever the sun is up.
Mm-hmm. And Gasperi meets Talia again once he gets a job at the Grand Luna Hotel in Colony 1.
Yeah. So he has moved from Colony 1, uh, yeah, and gets the job. He's kind of lonely. He has a cat, which I do want to point out because there's actually really cool, where the cat came from. That'll be in the next part. That's really exciting.
Yeah. Um. Oh yeah, we do hear that he has a sister named Zoe.
Mm-hmm.
Um.
And she works for the Time Institute.
Yes. Remember that tunnel that Dion, Olive's husband, was mentioning? She kept thinking it was about time travel. Time Institute makes it kind of sound like time travel. Gasperi doesn't like his job at the hotel. He thinks it's boring because he's just like a security guard, right?
Yeah.
Um, and then it's his sister Zoe's birthday, and he goes to visit her at work. And Zoe's having like a hard time. She thinks that she's suspicious that they might be living in a simulation. But she's like, what if we're living in a simulation?
And this is because what's it called? She like researches back in time and notices these three different people that all shared the same experience at the same time,
Mm-hmm.
but throughout different timelines. And so like her whole theory is like, well, that was obviously like a glitch. There's
Yes.
a glitch, so we might be living in a simulation, but there's no way to know unless we have somebody go back in time and hear stories from all these different people.
Mm-hmm.
And come to
Because
find out, like, what's it called? She, her job requires her, like, a certain amount of times that she does have to go back in time, like, as part of her job descriptions. But she refuses because somebody got lost in time, which we don't find out until later.
Hmm.
So we won't discuss that till later. But she refuses to go back in time. Like, she will not do it.
Yeah. Um, Gasperi is kind of like, okay, like, we're probably not living in a simulation. But then she brings up all this evidence, like she has a letter from Edwin, and his experience in the woods from 1912. And then she has Marion Bad, Olive's book, that mentions
And
murals.
then, what is it? The composer guy from the second story. His sister has it on camera.
Mm-hmm. And, yeah, and then Gasper is like, okay, well, maybe we are living in a simulation. So we
He's
get to
like,
this.
okay, maybe.
Yeah. And Zoe eventually offers to try to time travel to those times, which are 1912, 2019, 2020, and 2203, of course, which was the last book tour on Earth, 2203. But time travel is very, very illegal. Only government oh my gosh, I can't say that word.
Representative.
Representatives can time travel. Gasperi's like, well, whoa, 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 whoa. Hey, I wanna time travel. That sounds interesting, you know?
Yeah, he's like,
And
I'm not doing anything with my life, and
yeah,
I can learn all this stuff.
but Zoe doesn't want him to. She's like, bad idea. And then we learned that Olive died on her last book tour on Earth due to the pandemic that she was so scared of, or had at least a little fear of. That sickness that was in Australia. We learned that. It's just kind of like mentioned in passing because to them they're like, oh, history. And just we're like, wait, what? She's dead? She's dead? She died?
Yeah, but like, um, Gaspari's sister explains to him, like, you have to do so much research on everything from that time period, everything from before, and also that person's life, which means you also know that they are going, how they're going to die and when they're going to die, but you cannot
Yes.
tell them.
Mm-hmm. Because it'll change the timeline and who knows what would happen. And
Mm-hmm.
also, they would probably kill him, the government.
Yeah.
So there's that. And Zoe doesn't think that Gasperi can do that, though. But yeah, but because of that, we learned that Olive died on her last book tour due to the pandemic. Edwin went to war and then died in an insane asylum. We do learn those things. So Gasperi learns that his childhood friend Ephraim works at the Time Institute, and he's like, oh, cool. I already have like an in, right? So, and Ephraim hires him because he goes to Ephraim and he's like, hey, I want to be a time traveler. And Ephraim's like,
Yeah.
okay. He's like, I know
It's
you.
like, okay, girl.
Yeah. And Zoe's like, bruh, I didn't want him to work here. But Gasperi is very excited. He has to go to training. When he gives his 2 weeks notice, though, because Talia, who worked at the same hotel, she tries to warn him. She's like, the
My
Time
dad,
Institute.
yeah.
Yeah.
She's like, my dad used to work for these people, and they will throw you away like trash if they don't need you anymore. And that's how we figure out why they had moved to Moon Colony 2 from Moon Colony 1 whenever they were younger.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but Gasperi's like, this is the most exciting job I ever had.
Yeah, he's like, F you, girl, I don't care. I'm going. You can't stop me.
And then Gasperi and Ephraim, they kind of mention this rumor that the reason why Zoe hates like time travel so much is that maybe there's a rumor that she fell in love with a traveler and the traveler became lost in time, and so she doesn't like people going back in time. But Gasperi again is like, she was in love once. Whatever. He's like, I
He's
don't
like,
care.
okay.
Like Gasper literally does not care. He has one goal right now, and that is to be a time traveler. Um, so he's gonna conduct interviews with Olive, Edwin, and the man who played the violin. His name was Alan. He played it
Which is
in
supposedly what all these people are hearing is the violin in an air terminal.
yes. And then he'll interview Paul, who is Vincent's brother, who composed the violin music. So, and to be a time traveler, you train for like 5 years. So Gasperry does
Yeah,
that.
like he's got to know all their stuff and like all the stuff before, like Shakespeare, like books, movies, sports
Yeah.
teams. Like it's not just about this one person. Like he has to research 4 years because like the thing is you are not supposed to tell anybody that you're like a time traveler, right? But you're
Mm-hmm.
also not supposed to give it away. And they actually say like to him, you know, there might be other time travelers around you, but if they're good at their job, you won't know.
Mm-hmm. Which is pretty crazy.
Which actually comes back like to bite him in the butt later
Yeah.
on. So,
Yeah.
well, but yeah, like if they're good at their job, you will not know, which is, yeah, like that's insane. I would never even think about that. You know, 'cause he's not the only time traveler. Like they have different pods that they send them through. Like there's obviously more.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Yeah, it's pretty wild. Once his 5 years of training are complete, he's ready to go. And Zoe and he don't get along because of his decision to work as a time traveler. And the thing is, with time travelers, they get a tracker injected in them so they know where they are at all
yeah.
times. So it's not like he can just go off and do whatever. They know where he is.
Yeah, they're monitoring him.
And we get a transcript of Gasperry's interaction in his first interview with the violinist in the air terminal. It's just a transcript, just usual questions. It's like, oh, have you lived here your whole
Yeah.
life, and things like that, and you know.
Yeah, and the man like actually does mention like a Shakespeare quote.
Mm-hmm.
And Gaspery's like, "Oh, wait, what?" And the man's like, I thought you were a journalist. It's Shakespeare."
Oh
And he
yeah,
like makes some snarky comment like, "You should go back to school" or something like that because he
yeah,
didn't know like this one Shakespeare thing from like Romeo and Juliet or whatever.
yeah, yeah. And Gasperry also mentions, like time as time passes, that he time travels to see Edwin as the priest, and Paul to talk about the video, which was basically the first and second chapters. Um, and then he's gonna go to interview Olive now, and Zoe again warns him, like, you know how she's gonna die. Like,
You know,
that
like
you,
this is her last 3 days alive. Like she's gonna die 3 days from now from a pandemic.
yeah. And she's like, you know. And she's like, but do not prevent Olive's death. She's like, I am warning you, dude. Don't do it. She's all like, and he's like, yeah, I know. I was trained. I know not to do it. Gosh. He's like, yeah, whatever.
And
Yeah, so he's gonna get ready to interview Olive. Um, but that's the end of chapter 4. So it's getting real, because now he's time traveling to all these times and interviewing these people. Which we have those interviews in chapter 1 and 2 with Edwin and Paul. Again, still curious about Murella, seeing him from
Yeah,
Well, it almost
supposedly,
makes sense as a time traveler. I wonder that whole situation. That's wild too.
but yep,
But that's about that's where we're at right now. But it's getting real, guys.
I know because finally they're all like actually intertwining.
Yeah. It's like your mind's trying to be like prepare mentally preparing itself for like what's about to happen, but
Yeah.
your mind's just like, "Whoa, what's happening?" That's how it was when I was reading it. I was like, "Oh, stuff's happening," but I was trying to keep everything straight, you know, cuz there's so many characters that you're keeping up with. You're keeping up with Edwin, and you're keeping up with Olive and Sylvie and Dion, her husband, and Sylvie, her daughter, you know, and Mirella and Vincent, her bestie, and then Vincent's brother Paul, and then that violinist dude Alan in the air terminal, and it's just so many people to remember and what their roles are and how they're connected to this glitch, which they think is like a simulation glitch. So I think it's them trying to prove that maybe it's not a simulation. I mean, yeah, later on they go more into depth about it, but yeah, we'll talk about that in the next episode. But
I'm excited to talk about what's
yeah,
gonna
because
happen.
next episode is going to be wild. That's where it's going to
Yeah,
get
you
real.
better get your notebooks and pens because it's crazy.
But until next time, we'll be here slinging words and pills to pay the bills.